We've now reached the point where the entire Avowed saga has entered the "actually it's doing very well for us, please believe us" part of the news cycle, as the cope begins to spread and websites continue to run damage control for Obsidian. And I also want to talk about NetEase later, and how they want to completely dump all Western game devs, and I spoke to someone closely tied to this, and this is not good, fellas. This could literally be a woke apocalypse. Firstly, Avowed. Jason Schreier, a journalist who hates Gamergate despite being owned by it every time he brings it up, has spoken to Obsidian about Avowed. In his article here, where he spoke to the game's director, Avowed is confirmed to have taken 6 years in total to make and was originally a multiplayer take on Skyrim. After 2 years of development, Avowed was internally rebooted, according to Obsidian, from this multiplayer take into a more traditional single-player game. This is when Kerry Patel, the current game director, came on to salvage the project into what it is now. This part made me laugh, so the day that Obsidian decided to sit down and discuss Avowed's future following the multiplayer shift to single player, it was on January 6, 2021. Here's what Bloomberg said about that. Then the headlines began popping up. There was violence taking place on the other side of the country. At the US Capitol in Washington, D.C., what was normally a procedural vote to certify the winner of the presidential election had turned into chaos. It was January 6, 2021, and Obsidian's big day was being overshadowed by a riot. Obsidian decided to reschedule the all-hands meeting for later in the week. It was honestly a challenge on just about every front, Patel told me during a recent interview. Yeah, it wasn't a riot, Jason. They didn't really destroy anything. They just kind of peacefully walked around, took some pictures, and left. Of course, some escalated it anyways, and then the security people still shot and killed one person, which was wrong in every way to do so. Of course, this would be enough to trigger a room full of woke Western liberal developers to want to bend the knee and not continue working their jobs for the day. These people just seem to find any excuse they can to just not work. What does a so-called Capitol riot, which wasn't a riot, have to do with your job? This is like some guy who's stocking shelves in Canada hearing about the January 6th incident and then telling his boss, "Hey boss, I can't work today. Democracy was under attack and my feelings are now hurt, so I gotta go home." Literally nobody else took time off work when this happened. Oh my god, these current age devs, man, these people. Any excuse they can find, they will. But anyways, let's continue. According to Bloomberg, Obsidian presented prospective buyers with a pitch for Avowed, which the company hoped would be its magnum opus. A cross between Destiny and Skyrim that allowed players to adventure together in a massive fantasy world. Yeah, Avowed is neither Destiny nor Skyrim in terms of quality either way. The only thing Avowed really took from Destiny was its static NPCs that never move, and its barely passable writing to justify why you gotta go kill things for loot. Then this part happens where Obsidian confirmed that they had to scale back even more. They'd have to sacrifice the ambitions of building a Skyrim-style map where players could walk for hours and still not see everything. But for both technological and logistical reasons, that was proving to be an impossible quest. An impossible quest, you say, to do something that Bethesda did, mind you, and wrote the blueprint on years ago, not just in Skyrim, but in things like Oblivion and even Morrowind and then some. And if we want to just keep going back, I seriously just believe that these Western video game people, they're regressing in every single way, man. The things that seemed possible just 10 years ago, they feel as if they have been lost to these new age game developers forever. Did some video game equivalent of like the Library of Alexandria burn down that nobody knows about or talks about? Because why is it so hard to make something that is the same size and scope as Skyrim? You can't say that it's technical reasons, because Skyrim, that ran on a basic Xbox 360 for God's sakes. But you're telling me that these devs, 10 years more so removed with technology 2 generations ahead of what Skyrim was made on, they can't replicate something like that. This is like the first Iron Man movie all over again. Bethesda then was Tony Stark in that cave building his first suit. And these new people are the scientists who can't build anything remotely close despite having way more resources. Everything Bloomberg is saying here just kind of sounds like cope to me, and a lack of creative foresight and skill to be the issue more so than the technology or anything else. I'm not saying that Avowed needed to be the same procedural world like No Man's Sky scope-wise. But why is the end result a game where everything is static, nothing moves in towns, and the world can't accomplish what Skyrim did way before them on lesser hardware? Then again, I shouldn't be surprised since Obsidian is owned by Microsoft now. Remember that Microsoft also owns 343 Industries or Halo Studios now, but it's the same thing. And even then, they couldn't even release a playable version of older Halo games, a part of the Master Chief Collection, to work properly on current day hardware. Full games, mind you, that were already finished and done in every single way by Bungie and 343 or Halo Studios now, couldn't even port these games properly despite being given all of the blueprints, the engines, and everything that came along with those games when Microsoft bought the Halo IP from Bungie and everything that was attached to it. I just think that these newer studios and these devs are they're not clearly as talented as the old guard. Am I going crazy? Look, I hate to say it, but everything I see coming out of Microsoft, at least, it just feels like there's a massive gap in what happened before versus now. It also doesn't make sense since, technically speaking, when Avowed went into its rework from multiplayer to what it is now, by then, Microsoft had already bought Bethesda too. So Obsidian would have had access to Bethesda's stuff via Microsoft since they were both owned by them when they reworked the game into a single player experience. But nah, we can't do Skyrim. Best we can do is what we did. Just make it make sense, guys. It's like having all the things you need to build a house and then refusing to use it. I just don't understand why sometimes this happens, but let's just continue. Near the end of the interview, Avowed's director pretty much confirms that they want to make more games in that universe using this style. And honestly, I think if Obsidian were to take the criticisms to heart here from its unreactive world and very boring story and characters, which, let's be real, those are really big red flags, especially since the director is a writer of the universe that this game takes place in to begin with, which brings more concern as to how did you let such bad writing get into your game in the first place, but some things we may never know. But I do think a potential Avowed 2 that fixes all the issues that the game has could be a real banger. I think the gameplay, we can all agree, is pretty solid, and I've said this before in other videos. If Obsidian nailed anything in Avowed, it's the combat for sure. So keep that gameplay system, of course, add to it, but you guys did well there, so credit where it's due. But it's clear that's based on reviews and player feedback that beyond your combat system and maybe the exploration, as you know, just in finding chests or whatever, that a large majority of what's in this game isn't very interesting, but if you can take that and build on it, this could maybe one day become something that can become that Obsidian magnum opus, so to speak, or their fantasy New Vegas equivalent. Avowed is in a unique position that is not afforded to most AAA studios of their size, let's be real. Because if we were to base this game's performance on Steam alone, which is dwindling already by the way, Avowed would be cooked and Obsidian would be hit with massive layoffs. But I always said before that the saving grace of these Microsoft studios is Game Pass. I'm sure that well over 1 million people have probably jumped into Avowed day one on Game Pass. But of course, this is only because Game Pass is what it is. And another thing we have to say, I'm sure there are those who subscribe to the service to play Avowed. I'm sure that exists. I still think though right now, but I think the big reason why Game Pass has the subscriptions that it does right now, let's be honest guys, it's not Avowed, it's Call of Duty Black Ops 6 being on there. And Avowed is basically just riding the success that Black Ops brings to the surface, because if people are already clearly subscribing to play the latest COD, and then they see that Avowed shows up there, well they might as well check it out since it's already there, you know? But if I was Obsidian, I would be looking at those Steam numbers and realize those are the actual paying customers for those games, and those numbers are abysmal. And you need to ensure that you can cast a wider net, so to speak, when it comes to your future games. I mean, games with DEI and all of that slop, which Avowed has too, they just aren't doing very hot when they exist outside of that Game Pass safety net. Look at Lost Records, the game from the Life is Strange people. Currently on Steam, and this game is new by the way. It has only a bit over 1,000 players playing it on Steam. This is abysmal. And I mean, if you go look at Don't Nod, the studio that made Lost Records, the publisher that owns them, which is also named Don't Nod, their shares are horrible. From 2018 to 2025, their entire existence, they have lost 95.36% of their value since their highest point. That's what happens when people don't buy your game. And while again, Obsidian is owned by Microsoft, if they didn't have the Game Pass parachute to save them, they would be facing similar dire straits. The point here is that the West is not doing well when it comes to making video games these days. I'm sure you noticed. But Obsidian is doing themselves no favors, since recently it has come to my attention that their community managers are also banning people for, and I'm not kidding you, here's the banned user's reason as you can read here. User was found engaging in anti-DEI, which is not tolerated on this forum, as plain as day so you can see it. If you couldn't tell the angle of Avowed and Obsidian here, it's right there for all of you to see. If you criticize DEI practices in their forums, or diversity, equity, and inclusion if you don't know, you get banned from Avowed's forums. It might be a little hard to see, but here's what was said by this user with the banned comment near the bottom. These users were speaking about trans identity and gender-affirming related discussions as they were all tied to Avowed. They're talking about how some games are political, which may seem a bit volatile, but this is no way somehow grounds to ban someone from your gaming forum. But again, they got banned for being anti-DEI, which is crazy too. But at least they aren't denying that their game is definitely aligned with that sort of stuff, which is probably another reason why it's performing so poorly on Steam. Because players, let's be real, they just don't want to buy stuff like that at all if they can help it. Of course, the cope doesn't stop there. Found on the Steam forums, racist bigotry won again. Are you happy? Are you satisfied? Does your day feel that little bit better knowing a great developer comprised of hardworking folks is going to likely be shut down over this? All because you can't whack off to ugly character designs and cry about woke games all the time. Get the memo, this game wasn't for you in the first place. So let me get this straight. Obsidian is going to shut down because people didn't buy the DEI slop game, but also the game wasn't made for you anyways, so you shouldn't buy it to begin with?
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Doesn't that just mean that this guy is confirming that there's not enough DEI slop lovers like himself out there to realistically support a game that does this sort of thing then? Todd, buddy, you're dismantling your own argument here and confirming what others have said already. That there isn't a market for goy slop games in the modern era, especially within AAA. Do these people proofread their own arguments before hitting send? Or are they all really just... Are there just this many low IQ individuals roaming the internet like this without supervision? It's not racist to not want Avowed. Look, I said the combat is fun at least, but the writing, world, character, story, and all of that is slop. That's not racist to say. I've never once mentioned the color of the people's skin in this game as a negative light either. I mean, I've made fun of their haircuts, sure, and weird, hairy things with mustaches, like whatever the hell this thing is. But thanks for admitting that your love of bad writing and piss-poor characters is not enough to clearly support a game. I guess a broken clock is right every now and then. But as you can see, Avowed is just, they're not setting the world on fire. There is potential here if Obsidian completely removed the DEI stuff and just doubled down on actual good writing and world building for a sequel, but will it happen? I sincerely doubt it if I'm being honest. Obsidian seems to be yet another modern game developer that is completely consumed by activists anyways. So the likelihood that you won't get anything close to New Vegas' quality is very likely, but hey, this stuff is being gutted to a degree as well. So let's now move on to NetEase. You may know them as the developers behind Marvel Rivals. NetEase, however, is a mega huge company situated in China. Besides supporting their own Chinese-made games, they also have a lot of fingers in Western pies as well. As GameFile reports, in an industry earthquake, NetEase plans to cut more all-star game studios. So to start, NetEase invested hugely into Western game developers over the past few years. Some of these included places like Quantic Dream, which I reported on months ago with their Star Wars Eclipse game. And I spoke to people very closely tied to that project, and Eclipse, from what I was told, is a money sink that is taking forever to get made, and it's full of activists. All in all, nearly 20 Western game development studios have been funded by NetEase in the past few years alone. One dev studio, Worlds Untold, which is in Canada, they actually ceased operations after NetEase pulled all the funding. Another studio, a Sweden-based developer called Liquid Swords, also laid off a bunch of people after NetEase pulled funding too, according to GameFile. They also reported that the master plan here for NetEase is to divest and remove funding from pretty much almost all of their Western studios, because according to NetEase, none of these studios are developing anything that is either showing promise or bringing in the results that were promised. Grums also spoke on this and said, NetEase isn't just laying off the 6-people Marvel Rivals team, NetEase is also pulling funding from Western and potentially Japanese gaming studios. The CEO is said to be very unsatisfied with Western developers, calling them lazy, entitled, slow, and woke, according to a source that I spoke with. Yeah, so I spoke to my source about this after reading all of this, the same one who, in case you don't know, told me the story for Star Wars Eclipse, as in the whole origin of the main villain, the main gist of the story, how many playable characters there are, as well as Disney's demands, the budget, all of it. I did a whole video about that on the channel months ago. You can go watch it if you don't believe me. So I spoke to that source again about this because they are very much a part of this all too. From what they told me, NetEase has been trying to sell Quantic Dream, the Heavy Rain, Detroit, and now Eclipse studio, since around August 2024, as I'm told. They, as in NetEase, want to wash their hands of Quantic Dream because the game is taking way too long to make, and there's nothing really to show for it. I was also told that Casey Hudson, the guy who made Mass Effect out of BioWare and led that trilogy of games, he left BioWare quite a while back. As I'm told, in the case of Casey Hudson, when he got funding from NetEase, which was in the millions. Anyway, Casey Hudson eventually founded his own studio with NetEase called Humanoid, and this too was backed by them for years. And pretty much alongside Casey Hudson's company here and many others, none of these studios created anything of note that was actually able to become a real-life video game. In the case of Casey Hudson, when he got the funding from NetEase, which was millions, I was told that he immediately created smaller studios beneath Humanoid that would report to his parent studio, which would be the original Humanoid studio. Casey was apparently trying to create multiple games at this time and spent ludicrous amounts of money that NetEase gave him to create tech demos instead, cutscenes and trailers and etc., but nothing that was actually, playable as in a game, so to speak. So Casey Hudson found out sometime in 2024 that Humanoid would not be getting more funding since they spent all these years doing nothing and producing zero products. So Casey Hudson just kind of bounced, as I was told. Apparently, according to my source, Casey Hudson likely doesn't care either way what happened to Humanoid to begin with. Because the guy is a millionaire anyways, and he made tons of money from other projects already, like Mass Effect is a good example. So probably to him, Humanoid was just this vanity project thing that he did to make stuff, but ended up with nothing really. And as my source told me, the usual way these things go at NetEase is that these creators of successful things, they come in, they talk up this storm on how they want to make the next amazing game, then they get the funds, then they waste it, they double down on promises, they somehow raise more, and then when the raising doesn't keep coming in, they kind of just quit and then leave like bandits. Apparently, when it comes to those layoffs you likely heard about with Marvel Rivals, where that game director guy got let go in Seattle, I was told that this was done so NetEase could run Rivals like a proper game completely free of Western restraints or demands in the future. And when it comes to things like Rebel Wolves, the guys making Dawnwalker, the ex-Witcher devs, apparently they're also not getting any more funding from NetEase either, based on what I was told. NetEase is just cutting funding completely for all of these Western game studios. But the rumor that I heard with Dawnwalker is that if they can't cross the finish line due to NetEase pulling the funding, that the next buyer in line for Rebel Wolves right now and Dawnwalker is actually Embracer Group. But look, I'm just telling you what I've been told by people in the industry, alright? Don't shoot the messenger here. As my source put it, to sum it all up for you nicely, is that NetEase invested in 2021 and 22-ish and gave a crap ton of money to Western developers. These devs promised proper games. Unfortunately, a lot of them, not all of them mind you, but a lot of them ended up just becoming woke DEI slop studios that just wanted to push all the stuff that players don't want, and now, as my source said themselves, NetEase is just reaping the whirlwind going forward, and frankly, I don't really feel that bad for all this divesting if I'm being honest. As you've likely seen, it's not just NetEase, but Chinese game devs in general, or I guess even just Asia in total, let's be real. They have been carrying this industry for a while now. 2024, for example, that would have been complete ass cheeks had Asian devs not released their games that year. But from what I understand, based on what was said to me, NetEase, which is China-based, is basically taking all of their money and support out of everyone who isn't inherently China-based or, just Chinese ran pretty much. So if you were worried about Rivals, as of now, don't be. That game, from what I'm told, is now 100% China-backed. It has tons of funding, and they are doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on support for that game because Rivals crossed something like 40 million players already, which is knucking futz, by the way. But from what I understand, the whole point of this is that NetEase wants to essentially make their Chinese-based endeavors become insanely well-funded and just run them like well-oiled machines. So what's the point here, you may be asking? It's simple, guys. It's exactly what I said would happen, which is that China will inevitably become the de facto juggernaut developers of video games and market share in gaming going forward. They will likely take over the industry, completely erase any hint of wokeness or anything like gay characters, all of that. And then they will just rule the gaming industry with an iron fist that cannot be swayed due to how large of a net they will cast across every single genre, franchise, and then some. Now you may be saying, well, good that China will be erasing wokeness, but isn't this just a monopoly? Yes, you're right. It totally is. And frankly, it would not have happened if Western game development studios not been overrun by activists and completely given into wokeness to begin with. Effectively meaning that this hostile takeover is due to their own hubris and delusion of the pink-haired, there's infinity genders game devs and executive mind virus that has been ravaging games for years now. Right now, Western games are mostly cooked. As I showed earlier, Avowed, a big Western AAA game. is not doing well in raw actual paid sales, and they're just banning people who speak against DEI. But here's the thing, right? Once China takes us all over, and they will, because these studios are all ran by idiots and refuse to cater to the players' wants or needs, China will then inevitably just make the games that you want to see. You want Avowed but without the DEI, China will do it likely. And they will make it in half the time because they got millions of people that are eager to work on these games within China right now that are just waiting to go. Look, after the explosive success of Black Myth Wukong, pretty much this spelled doom for the woke gaming industry if I've ever seen it. As this article states, Wukong was the great unifier to push China as an entire country to just allocate their efforts and desires to effectively spirit bomb the game industry into compliance going forward. Wukong did so well that other games like Phantom Blade Zero got more funding because of its success, because they want to obviously replicate that success for themselves. Even Tides of Annihilation, which I've been playing gameplay footage of while I talked here as you noticed, that's made in China too. The point here is that this apocalypse, so to speak, that's coming for the games industry is of their own making. The Western game industry has pretty much two paths ahead of them. They either keep doing what they're doing, which isn't working, and China just invades them completely and they're cooked. Or they do what China's doing, but with their own autonomy, and make games that people actually want. However, by doing this, they will have to shed the dead weight of DEI and all of that behind. However, if I'm being honest, I just don't see the most of the whole Western gaming sphere doing this, if I'm being honest. Because all of these devs that are working now, majority that have been raised on victimhood mindsets, the very DEI principles that are poisoning the well have become their tenets. It's all they know pretty much, and now you're just going to tell these people to make games devoid of the things they were taught were of the utmost importance? Good luck, because I doubt it. Which is why I think the inevitable outcome is that these companies just die, like Don't Nod, which is, like I said, lost 95% of their value already. Or Ubisoft, or any of these other game studios, and then China can just replicate what they're doing and faster and probably cheaper, and that's it. And eventually these woke devs will need a home to work at some game studio once the takeover is complete. And then they will have two choices themselves. They can either shed all the things they were raised and taught by other woke activists to land a job at one of these Chinese-run studios, who, by the way, will not allow them to push any of that stuff because it goes against the Chinese laws. Or they just leave the industry entirely, and that's it. And the end game here may seem preferable, but I think having one group completely controlling everything is probably not a good idea. And it's clear that NetEase will just cut funding whenever they want regardless, as they see these devs and studios as numbers and not really as people. As of right now, the answer is that this is going to be inevitable. The woke apocalypse is coming, and they have no one to blame but themselves. Sure, some stuff might do okay due to backing like Avowed with Microsoft, but largely speaking, anyone that is outside of these massive safety nets, they're going to drown. And the Chinese sure as hell aren't going to save you guys. They're just going to wave as you drown and your lungs just fill with water. But really, these people can complain all they want. The reality is that they need to change their ways. Because if they don't, they won't have the option not to. So it's either you change now to carve a slice of the pie for yourself, or China will just do it for you. So it's up to these game dev studios, and I hope some game dev or executive is watching this and realizes this before it's too late. Because right now, you're at a crossroads, you Western gaming freakazoids, and it's up to you to either control your own future, or the land of China will own every facet of you. Ball's in your court. Let's hope you don't miss for your own sake. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. Subscribe. I'll see you soon.